What we're going to talk about here is the Gears of War 6 wish list that King Abs has, and kind of like his thoughts around it. So first and foremost, what I want to say is that, when we're talking Gears of War's, campaign, story, things of that nature, I think there's a lot of things to be really excited about with the next Gears of War title, but I do think that obviously, even though I loved Gears 5, not everybody else liked Gears 5. There was a lot of people who did not like, Gears 5, but I think from a campaign perspective, Gears 5 really showed some interesting elements, that being like the semi-open world. Obviously, it was a lot brighter than other, Gears of War entries, but I think that they're kind of laying a foundation of definitely some promising, exciting elements of Gears 6, but there's definitely always things that you can improve upon.
A problem with modern gaming is that too many video games nowadays sort of cut off their identity and cut off what actually made their game successful in order to either chase current trends, use the IPs to spread politics, or to appeal to a whole other audience, whilst trying to dispose its core audience. I think Gears of War as a franchise has been the victim of this in recent years, chasing trends, not pleasing its core audience, and not paying attention to the nuances that make the story and gameplay so special. Another recent game that springs to mind is Back 4 Blood, chasing trends, not appealing to its core audience, and really stepping far away from what made the Left 4 Dead series so special. As a result, losing the identity of the game itself, Back 4 Blood ultimately failed to recapture the magic of the Left 4 Dead series. So for Gears of War to succeed again, they need to create a game similar to what has proven to be successful, and refining and changing certain elements of it. Like every other hit franchise, if you have a winning formula, you don't go on and try to reinvent the wheel. You expand upon every good idea that the franchise has created. The core audience of a franchise is never disposable. Now, I'm not saying it just outright copy Gears 1 to 3, no. What I'm saying is there's a proven and tested winning formula made in the original games. So study it and recapture it, give your fans what they want, and everything else will fall into place.
So let's talk about that for a sec. I think Abs makes a really good point here that you don't have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to creating stories. Now, that being said, what I will say, if there's any pushback whatsoever, maybe he's not necessarily saying this, but I think that you have to continue innovating and continue adapting, because if you don't, then you're just going to be left in the past. You're going to be left, kind of behind the curve in terms of, what is starting to, change and things of that nature, whether we're talking Gears or any other game. I mean, I'll give you an example. Call of Duty, one of my other favorite games of all time, and franchises of all time, definitely, evolved and adapted over time. Now, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. When we look at like advanced warfare in Call of Duty, obviously it went away from what Call of Duty was all about, right? There was, before it was all about, boots on the ground, gritty kind of combat. Whereas when you got to advanced warfare, it was more, the jetpack era of COD. And it was fine for what it was. I actually liked Advanced Warfare, but what followed Advanced Warfare, they doubled down on this idea of the jetpack era, and they brought out, of course, Black Ops 3 and then Infinite Warfare, which I believe, even though I don't think that Advanced Warfare was the downfall of Call of Duty, even though you could consider it that, I think that it started the dark ages of COD. Because Black Ops 3 and Infinite Warfare, I believe, were two of the worst games in Call of Duty's history. And, we were in the kind of dark times then before we got out of it, and we kind of came back to, the boots on the ground feel, World War II, and so on and so forth. But I think that Gears, even though they've tried a couple of different things, even though, like, from a popularity standpoint, Gears of War is still popular. Like, it's still one of Xbox's best-selling games. I do agree that we need to take maybe a few more elements, that being the coalition, from the older games. I think they tried it with Gears of War 4, but when they got to Gears 5, they kind of did change some stuff. Didn't really, it wasn't as gritty and things of that nature. It was a little bit brighter. The maps were brighter, things of that nature. And yes, I did not like, how they were kind of trying to be a little bit trendy in terms of like the face paints, the different customizable options, and things that you could like pay for in the store and such. I didn't like that so much, but nonetheless, I do think that you have to be consistently adapting and evolving a franchise to be able to go to those next heights and such. Because if you just stay complacent, you're not going to grow. You're just going to kind of keep the same niche audience that you had from the beginning.
What I loved about Gears of War when I was growing up was the unique and memorable characters that littered the universe in the midst of an unforgiving war. The protagonist, Marcus Phoenix, was likable. He wasn't generic at all. He had a backstory. He took shit from no one. He was the perfect military professional, and he always got the job done. He was always serious, especially in his monotone voice, but he was an excellent leader. We also had Dominic Santiago as part of Delta Squad. He was always there for you. He had his own overarching plot and his own demons that he was fighting against. But he was always there for Marcus throughout the trilogy, and he was your best friend that'll never give up on you. Even if it meant sacrificing himself to save you and the world, his loyalty was unlike anyone else's. Step forward Augustus Cole, the Cole Train. This man is not like your average. A mountain of a man. He's cocky, he's arrogant, he's funny, a fucking badass wrecking machine, and literally a one-man army. Former thrashball player who joined the military to fight Locust. Highly energetic, enthusiastic and cunning. He has an inexhaustible amount of energy that seems to amp up people around him. He was the perfect team player. Not to mention Damon Baird, the blonde genius, the Cole Train's best friend, a mechanical and scientific expert, but also a cocky smartass, and an asshole for the most part. He's a sarcastic and negative person, but despite this, he was highly intelligent, and he was relied upon many times from the rest of Delta Squad, whether it was to fix, build, or blow shit up. These are 4 of the gold standard of characters from Gears of War that truly resonate with fans across the world. Each of these 4 characters could have easily been a protagonist of their own separate game. That's how well developed they were. I've not even mentioned other characters like the Carmines, Anya, Ty, Dizzy and others, so you get the picture. But in recent years, I just cannot get on board with characters like Kate, Del and JD. I think they offer very little. They come across as immature in the midst of a planetary war, they're selfish, they don't know how to respect leaders or become leaders, and I honestly think they're just poorly written. But I do think the characters in Gears 5 Hivebusters and Gears Tactics were written a lot better. They were more likable, they had more to them, they had interesting backgrounds that tied them into the universe as well. Were they as good as characters like Cole, Anya or Paddock? Not really, but I am a fan of the creation of Sid Redburn. I think he is a very good, hard as nails character that really fits the Gears of War universe. So in Gears of War 6, they have to look at creating more larger than life characters and develop the characters very well.
Okay, so let's talk about this. A little bit of some pushback I'm going to give Abs on this one. Now, overall, I agree with what he's saying. In terms of the characters from the original trilogy, we grew to absolutely love those guys. But that's usually how it is with really any franchise out there. You grow to really love the original characters. Now, the problem with the characters now, let's just talk Kate and JD in particular. I loved the direction they were going with Gears of War 4. The problem wasn't so much to me that they were poorly written. My issue is that they didn't give them enough time to develop, or we haven't given them enough time to develop. And I put that a decent amount on the Coalition in terms of we didn't, the development of these characters has been a little bit shaky. Now, let's talk about it. So if we go to Gears of War 4, I thought overall the story, like that story, as well as like where they were taking the characters, like the next generation of Gears of War, I thought it was a great starting point. When we got to Gears 5, the problem is that we were JD Phoenix in all of Gears of War 4. Then you get to Gears 5 and it switches and you're Kate Diaz. To me, that's where there was a massive disconnect, because they didn't give JD Phoenix enough time to adapt and evolve into being a really lovable character. I personally believe that if they would give JD a little bit more time as the focal point, we would have absolutely been all on board with JD. The problem is when you got to Gears 5, Kate Diaz, even though I love her, I like her as a character actually quite a bit, JD's character, they kind of turned him into a different, like in a different direction. And his story kind of went in this way where wasn't likable in Gears 5. He almost came off as like somewhat of a douchebag. And I did not like that whatsoever, because this character that we played in Gears 5 is now in Gears 6 totally kind of changing. And Kate Diaz, I feel like I would be totally down to play as her. But the problem is I feel like they should have given us more time as JD, really develop those other core characters like, Del, like Kate Diaz. And then, maybe once you got to Gears 7 is where you start putting the pieces together around Kate Diaz. Now, obviously, the biggest thing to me and the biggest reason why they haven't given these guys, much, the new characters, a lot of development is at the end of Gears 5, you're given the choice whether to kill JD or Del. And that right there is giving you this indication that they don't really care as much about the development of JD or about these characters. It also gives me the indication that potentially the Coalition didn't know exactly where they wanted to go with the story. Now, that being said, we could be totally off on that, but I just think that it's not so much that we just loved those characters in the original 3 games, which we do, but it's just that the new characters, they would be fine if we gave them more time to develop. Instead of going from JD Phoenix in Gears of War 4 to Kate Diaz in Gears 5, they should have just continued with JD in Gears 5 and kind of really double down on that. And not saying that we can't play Kate Diaz down the road, but I just think that you're switching characters and then you're deciding on a character we played in Gears of War 4 is up for the possibility of being killed off in Gears 5, depending on our choice. I just didn't like that part of it. I think I do put a lot of that on the Coalition, but I do think that we as the community need to give, let these characters develop a little bit and see where their stories go. So I just think time will tell. We gave, Marcus, Baird, Cole, Dom, we gave all of them, those 3 games to fully develop into who they were. We've only given JD and Kate Diaz and Del, 2 games, right? So let's just see kind of where it goes. Obviously, I don't like where it's gone so far necessarily, but let's give it a little bit more time. Let's kind of give the Coalition the benefit of the doubt.
When it comes to storytelling in the Gears of War universe, I think Gears of War 2 is the gold standard. From the start, we are shown Chairman Prescott rallying the troops, motivating them that this is now the time to take the fight back to the Locust on their home turf. Humanity has been on the brink of extinction for too long, and now they have to fight to ensure their survival as a species. So from here, the rest of the game, your job is to of course take the fight to the Locust. You go underground into the Hollow. There's so much at stake, as you then realize the Locust are using a giant freaking worm to sink the nearby cities of Jacinto. So then you gotta kill that big boy from the inside to stop the Locust. But then you also have been given orders from the COG's high command of a decommissioned COG outpost, also known as the New Hope Research Facility. But then your boy Dom is also looking for his wife who's been captured, and so on. Every subplot has a purpose to the overarching story. Nothing just happens because of the sake of it. Everything is intertwined. This is war, and everything is on the line.
Okay, so all right, so let's talk about that. I agree. I think that there were just in Gears of War 2 and even, Gears of War 3 is my favorite, game of all time. Gears of War 2 is definitely up there as well. I absolutely loved kind of where it was going. I mean, I think what was so great about it was Gears of War 1 kind of set the foundation. Gears 2, elevated that vision, and Gears 3, I think, eclipsed all of them. Like, Gears of War 3 was kind of the culmination of just the build-up of this brothers to the end mantra and all of that. I think it was so well done. But yes, I think that they need to kind of do that in somewhat moving forward here in, of course, in Gear 6. I think it's really important that there's a build-up, and I feel like there is somewhat of a build-up from Gears 5 and Gears of War 4 as well. But it'll be interesting to see where they go with the story and such, and who we play as in Gears 6. I think a lot of people think we're going to play as Kate Diaz. Most likely we're going to play as her, and it'll be interesting to kind of see where they try to, where they take the story moving forward.
When it comes to level design for Gears of War, Gears 2 is the gold standard for me once again. In Gears of War 1, you often spent a lot of time through the streets, throwing frag grenades into emergence holes, and it got repetitive after a while. But in Gears of War 2, it was bigger, badder and better. The set pieces were amazing. There are times when you are fighting on the top of an assault derrick against Locust forces. Then you are making your way through the eerie and strange place known as the Hollow. Then the next minute, you're in the inside of a giant worm. There's blood, goo, veins and remains everywhere as you look to kill the riftworm. Other times you're on a Locust gunboat fighting an underwater apex predator, or you're riding a reaver in the sky whilst a giant hydra chases you. These different levels change up the gameplay massively. I don't know if Gear 6 will be linear or open world. Will there be more shades of exploration? I don't know, but what I do know is that cool set pieces and level designs help make a Gears of War campaign great.
Okay, in terms of level design, I think Abs is 100% on point with that. Even though I disagree that it's the standard, it should be one of the standards. Gears 3 and Gears 2, for me at least, for sure, are the two standards when it comes to that. He's right though. There were some epic moments in Gears of War 2 that it could, you could say, like, from the set pieces and such that they used, it could have actually been above that of Gears of War 3 in terms of like what they did. Gears of War 2 was so well done in terms of the set pieces. I do agree that we need to have those larger than life types of moments and such. I think that's going to be really important moving into Gear 6 for sure. And I think that now that the Coalition are taking their time, they're doing this thing right. I think the more time that they have to really realize what made the original trilogy so special, kind of implementing those things, not everything, not a copy and paste, but as long as they're implementing some of those things into Gears 6, I think we should be off to a really, really good start.
One of the main themes of Gears of War, from the aesthetics to the landscapes to the characters and enemies, mainly in the first two installments, there was a dark and gritty tone. Not as much in Gears of War 3, but it was still there to some degree. The first Gears game was almost a horror game at times, when you enter a tomb where a berserker is awaiting you, to watching your step in almost utter darkness, otherwise you'd become eaten alive by krill. I don't think the environments necessarily have to always be dark. It depends on the tone and where you are on the world of Sarah, but it has to have some involvement in the campaign in my opinion. To be gritty is to basically have strong qualities of tough, uncompromising realism in the story. The characters should act in a real and authentic way, being resolute and courageous. When I think of Gears of War, I think of the movie Predator, badass soldiers, like a 70s or 80s film. Whether they're male or female, it doesn't matter. They should be tough as nails, unique and gritty characters.
Once again, I agree with this. It needs to be darker, more gritty. Part of me feels like Gears of War 4 was pretty dark and pretty gritty throughout the course of it. I feel like the Coalition was pretty true in a number of ways. Sure, they didn't maybe have as many set pieces that were like as great as Gears of War 2 or Gears of War 3, but it definitely was still dark and gritty. I think Gears 5 was more like the Coalition's Gears of War 3, where they wanted to be a little bit brighter. I thought Gears of War 3 was still dark and gritty. It was definitely dark and grittier than Gears 5, but I feel like they were kind of, that being the Coalition, were trying to take Gears 5 and kind of make it their Gears of War 3 kind of esque version with a semi-open world and things of that nature. Gears 6 definitely needs to be darker. more gritty. Go back to that Gears of War 2 especially, but even Gears of War 3, having it a little bit darker and grittier, I think is going to make it, a lot more. It's going to just kind of bring a lot of us as fans back into the experience of what we love so much about that original trilogy.
In Gear 6, I'd like to see the return of more villainous, unforgiving and merciless enemies. The Locust Horde were brutal and unique. In Gear 6, I don't know if the Locust will return or not, but either way, whether it's the Locust, Swarm or even another threat, the enemies have to present a credible case and be memorable. I personally think they should redesign Swarm to look more unique and monstrous, because I'm not really a fan of their designs, and currently I think they're just playing second fiddle to the Locust in almost every department, and these guys are supposed to be the evolution of the Locust, but I don't really see it.
In terms of the characters, or I should say like the enemies and the bosses and such, I 100% agree with him on this. The bosses aren't really that great in Gears of War 4 or Gears 5. I'm just, I'm not a massive fan of it. I think there needs to be more emphasis on the Locust Horde as a whole, not so much the robots and things of that nature that came in Gears of War 4 as well as Gears 5. There was a lot of people that didn't really like that. Let's put it that way. They didn't like the choices of characters in terms of like what you were fighting. Like a lot of levels in Gears of War 4 where you're playing, you're fighting against like the robots and such, and that was something that I didn't personally like. There wasn't as much emphasis on the Locust Horde. Changed slightly in, of course, Gears 5, but bosses are very important. Whether you're talking Rom, he was probably the most iconic in the Gears of War universe. I definitely think there needs to be more emphasis on better bosses and the villains as a whole. Reyna is going to be cool for sure. She is cool, but there needs to be like her minions and her like characters that are gonna be like by her side. I think those need to be very well defined moving into Gear 6, where there's some characters or some of those bosses and villains that we absolutely like grow to love down the journey of Gear 6, as well as even moving into the next installments of the series.
You'll notice in the background of this and many of my other Gears of War videos, the music behind the Gears of War universe, whether it's a main menu theme or other original soundtracks. I think the music behind a video game, and even any other entertainment mediums really, helps set the tone in different instances, whether it's a scene, the atmosphere being portrayed, the emotions, encountering enemies, boss fights and so on. These should be implemented in the correct ways, to perfectly match the colour palettes and all of the other finer details in the creation of the gameplay and cutscenes. I think Gears of War should return to similar iconic music and themes that were created in the original games, similar to what Halo Infinite did. But when it comes to the sound design, it's difficult to of course explain how I would want things to sound. But to summarise, I want there to be weight and intensity behind the sound design of the world, the characters, the weapons and the story. Whether it's the weight of sound of your character moving and hitting covers, the weight of sound of the different weapons you're using, the explosions, etc. Paying attention to these nuances and details helps differentiate the game, gives Gears of War its identity, and of course the smaller finer details do add up and helps give the game soul.
Okay, so when it comes to music, yes, obviously, I don't think that they've gone too far off in terms of like what sounds like Gears of War. Sure, I think that they should use more emphasis on the original soundtracks from the original 3 games in Gear 6, just to kind of give you that nostalgia somewhat. Sure, adding new things in is always a good thing because you want to continue to adapt and continue to evolve for sure. But I also think that what we've grown to love when it comes to music is very important, that some of those things are very much so implemented in the future entries of Gears of War. And I think the Coalition's done okay at this, but Gears 6 double down on the original kind of soundtracks and such, moving into the future of this thing. But with that being said, guys, King Abs, absolutely awesome content creator in the Gears of War space, guys. Put his link in the description. down below. Go check out his content, guys. Create some awesome Gears of War content. Let me know what your guys' wish list, though, is for the Gears 6 campaign and story. Let me know in the comment section down below. And for more Gears 6 content and videos, stay here with Zero TV.